August 19th, 1944. Wehrmacht Headquarters, East Prussia. General Oberst Alfred Jodl reviewed the latest intelligence reports from the collapsing Western Front. His staff had calculated the mathematics of Allied supply lines stretching over 400 miles from the Normandy beaches to Patton's spearheading Third Army. The Americans have outrun their logistics. Patton will halt within days, perhaps hours. No army can sustain such advanced speeds without fuel. From his position at Hitler's Wolfschanze headquarters, Jodl analysed what every German general understood from experience. An armoured division consumed 150,000 gallons of fuel daily when advancing. The Americans were now 400 miles from their supply depots. The calculation was inescapable. Patton's Third Army would grind to a halt, giving the Wehrmacht time to regroup at the Seine, perhaps hold until winter. What Jodl didn't know was that 125 miles away, 5,958 trucks were already rolling eastward in an endless convoy, headlights blazing in defiance of military doctrine, carrying 12,500 tons of supplies every 24 hours. The Red Ball Express, a logistics operation so audacious that German military science had never conceived it possible, was about to shatter every assumption about mechanized warfare. Within 72 hours, Patton's supposedly immobilized tanks would crash through German positions at the Seine. Within a week, they would liberate Paris. Within a month, they would stand at the German border. The Wehrmacht's finest military minds were about to receive a lesson in American logistics that would redefine their understanding of modern warfare. Delivered by 23,000 truck drivers, 75% of them African American, who turned a one-way highway system into the most efficient military supply line in history. The German General Staff's confidence in American logistical failure stemmed from decades of military experience and recent observations. The Wehrmacht had pioneered blitzkrieg, revolutionized combined arms warfare, and understood intimately the tyranny of supply lines. Their own campaigns had repeatedly stalled when logistics failed to keep pace with tactical success. In Russia, the Wehrmacht's advance had foundered not from Soviet resistance initially, but from the simple inability to supply forces across vast distances. German trucks broke down on Russian roads. Horse-drawn wagons, still 80% of German military transport, couldn't match the speed of panzer spearheads. Railway gauge differences meant supplies piled up hundreds of miles from the front. General der Panzertruppe Heinrich von Luttwitz, who would command 47 Panzer Corps from September 1944, had written in July, "The Americans face the same logistical impossibility we faced in Russia. Their mechanical advantage becomes a disadvantage. Machines require fuel, ammunition, parts. They have advanced 400 miles in 30 days. History teaches us what comes next: paralysis." German intelligence meticulously tracked American consumption rates. A single Sherman tank burned 0.5 miles per gallon on roads, far worse cross-country. An infantry division required 700 tons of supplies daily. An armoured division needed 1,000 tons. Patton commanded 12 divisions advancing on a 60-mile front. The mathematics seemed irrefutable. 12,000 tons daily, transported 400 miles from the beaches over damaged roads through a transportation network the Germans had systematically destroyed during their retreat. General Major Siegfried Westphal, who would become Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt in September, calculated on August 20th, "Even if the Americans possessed unlimited trucks, which they don't, and perfect roads, which they don't, and no mechanical failures, which is impossible, they still couldn't sustain Patton's advance more than another 48 hours. Physical laws cannot be violated, not even by American industry." At 2 p.m. on August 25, 1944, in a requisitioned French chateau near Lessay, Lieutenant Colonel Laurent Ayres of the Motor Transport Service faced a room full of sceptical officers. The math they presented was stark. Patton's Third Army was consuming supplies faster than any army in history, advancing at speeds that defied all logistical planning. Traditional supply methods, railway transport, scheduled convoys, depot-to-depot distribution, had collapsed under the strain. "Gentlemen," Ayres announced, "we're going to create a one-way highway from Cherbourg and the beaches to the front lines. Every vehicle will run 20 hours out of 24. No stopping except for gas and emergencies. We'll move 12,500 tons daily minimum." The name came from railway terminology. A red ball freight was an express shipment that took priority over everything else. The Red Ball Express would operate on the same principle: absolute priority, no delays, no exceptions. The technical specifications defied German military doctrine. 2 parallel one-way highways, one for loaded trucks going forward, one for empties returning. 24-hour operations with headlights blazing, abandoning blackout discipline. No stop policy except for fuel and mechanical failure. 5-minute convoy intervals, maintaining 35 miles per hour average speed. Mobile maintenance units every 50 miles. MP checkpoints removing any vehicle below 25 miles per hour. Colonel Charles O. Thrasher, commanding the advanced section of ADSEC, Advanced Section Communications Zone, reviewed the projected numbers. "We need 140 truck companies, 5,958 vehicles minimum, operating at 90% availability. That's impossible by any logistics textbook ever written." Yet within 36 hours, the impossible was operational. On August 26, 1944, drivers from the 3916 Quartermaster Truck Company climbed into their GMC CCKW 2.5-ton trucks, nicknamed the Deuce and a Half, loaded with 105mm artillery shells bound for Patton's guns at Melun, 300 miles east. The demographic composition of the Red Ball Express would have stunned German racial theorists. Of the 23,000 drivers who would eventually operate the route, approximately 75% were African American soldiers, serving in a still segregated army. These men, who couldn't eat in white restaurants or use white facilities in much of America, were keeping the most celebrated white general's army in motion. The drivers developed their own culture within hours. They painted slogans on their trucks: Patton's Blood Bank, Hitler, Here We Come, Detroit to Berlin Express. They created their own traffic rules. Slower vehicles pulled off immediately, mechanical failures were pushed into ditches. Any truck below 20 miles per hour was considered a roadblock. By August 28th, German reconnaissance units began reporting something unprecedented. Units from Aufklärungsabteilung 116 radioed from positions overlooking the main Red Ball route. Continuous vehicle column, headlights visible for 20 kilometers, no spacing, no blackout discipline. Estimate 1,000 vehicles per hour. Americans have abandoned all military precaution. This violated everything German military doctrine taught. Headlights at night invited air attack. Continuous columns presented perfect artillery targets. No spacing between vehicles meant a single disabled truck could halt an entire convoy. Yet the Americans seemed unconcerned. General Lieutenant Edgar Feuchtinger, commanding the 21st Panzer Division, personally observed the Red Ball Express from concealed positions on August 30th. His report to Army Group B headquarters reflected growing alarm. "The enemy operates a supply system beyond our comprehension. Vehicles pass at 30-second intervals, day and night, without pause. They don't hide, don't disperse, don't follow any rules we understand. It's not military science, it's mass production applied to warfare." What the Germans couldn't understand was that American logistics operated on different principles entirely. Where German doctrine emphasized concealment, Americans relied on volume. Where Germans conserved vehicles, Americans assumed 20% mechanical failure and planned accordingly. Where Germans followed strict military procedure, Americans improvised continuously. The numbers achieved by the Red Ball Express defied German calculations of what was logistically possible. First week, August 25th to 31st, 1944, 89,939 tons of supplies delivered. Daily average, 12,848 tons. Round-trip distance, 686 miles. Vehicle rotations, 5,958 trucks making 1.5 trips daily. Fuel consumed by the operation itself, 300,000 gallons. German logistics specialists captured these numbers from American documents and dismissed them as propaganda. But the numbers were real, and they were accelerating. By September 5th, the Red Ball Express had established a rhythm that seemed impossible to German logistics officers who still relied on horse-drawn wagons for 80% of their transport. Convoys departed every 5 minutes from the western terminus. Average convoy, 67 vehicles. Load per vehicle, 5 tons standard, 7 tons frequent overload. Time to cover 350 miles one way, 14 hours average. Turnaround time at each end, 2 hours. Vehicles in constant motion, 5,000 at any given moment. The Red Ball Express generated innovations hourly as drivers and mechanics solved problems German military science considered insurmountable. When trucks broke down, approximately 1,800 daily, mobile maintenance units performed repairs on the roadside. Mechanics developed a triage system, 15 minutes to fix or push it off the road. Parts were cannibalized from vehicles deemed unrepairable. Engines were swapped in 45 minutes using mobile cranes. When the designated Red Ball route became congested, drivers created alternate paths. They commandeered French buses to move personnel and free up trucks for cargo. They borrowed German vehicles, painting them olive drab and pressing them into service. They built bypasses around destroyed bridges, using rubble from bombed buildings as roadbed. The Germans, observing this chaos that somehow produced order, couldn't comprehend it. German logistics doctrine emphasized careful planning, maintenance schedules, and proper procedures. The Americans violated every principle, yet their system accelerated rather than collapsed. The most stunning revelation for German observers was American fuel management. The Red Ball Express consumed 300,000 gallons of gasoline daily just for its own operations, more than many German armies received for all purposes. Yet fuel never ran short. The Americans had created a parallel marvel, Operation Pluto, pipelines under the ocean, laying fuel pipelines across the English Channel. By September 1944, fuel flowed through underwater pipes German intelligence hadn't even detected. Forward fuel dumps were established every 25 miles along the Red Ball route. Tanker trucks ran their own parallel convoy system, ensuring no vehicle waited more than 10 minutes for refueling. General Major Walter Warlimont observed from aerial reconnaissance photographs, "The Americans have fuel dumps larger than our entire strategic reserves. They burn more gasoline moving gasoline than we allocate to entire panzer divisions. This isn't war as we understand it, it's industrial overflow." The Red Ball Express didn't just supply Patton's advance, it multiplied its speed exponentially. German military doctrine calculated that an armoured division could sustain 20 to 30 miles advance daily under optimal conditions. Patton's divisions, supplied by the Red Ball Express, averaged 40 to 60 miles daily for weeks. On September 1st, 1944, the 4th Armoured Division advanced 35 miles in morning operations, halted for resupply at noon, Red Ball trucks were waiting with fuel and ammunition, and advanced another 32 miles in the afternoon. This 67-mile single-day advance shattered German defensive planning, which assumed maximum 30-mile daily advances. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, reviewing the reports in East Prussia, initially refused to believe them. No armoured force can advance 60 miles daily for a week. Mechanical failures alone prevent it. This is propaganda or misidentification. But intercepted American radio traffic confirmed it. More disturbing for German commanders, the Americans were broadcasting their positions openly, without code. supremely confident in their ability to move faster than Germans could react. By September 5, 1944, German intelligence had compiled comprehensive reports on the Red Ball Express. The implications were catastrophic for Wehrmacht planning. Every assumption about American military capability required revision. The report contained observations that defied German military science. Americans wasted vehicles prodigiously, abandoning damaged trucks rather than repairing them. Drivers operated on stimulants for days, violating every principle of personnel management. No camouflage discipline, making the entire system vulnerable to air attack that never came. Mechanical failure rates of 30% daily, simply overwhelmed by redundancy. Fuel consumption that would bankrupt any European military. Field Marshal Walter Model's response revealed growing desperation. If these reports are accurate, we face not a superior army, but a superior civilization. They make no effort to hide because they don't fear us. They waste resources because they have infinite resources. We cannot defeat this with military tactics. The Red Ball Express drivers paid a physical price German observers couldn't see. Drivers operated for 72 straight hours, hallucinating from exhaustion and benzodrine. Accidents killed 300 drivers in the Red Ball's operational period. Trucks collided in fog, overturned on damaged roads, burned when overheated engines ignited. Yet morale remained extraordinarily high. These men, mostly African Americans denied equal rights at home, understood they were making history. They were proving Hitler's racial theories wrong, with every mile driven, every ton delivered. Captured German officers provided eloquent testimony to the Red Ball Express's impact. Oberst Hans von Luck, taken prisoner in September 1944, told interrogators, "We knew we'd lost when we understood your supply system. You violate every rule, waste fuel, abandon vehicles, exhaust drivers, yet succeed through sheer volume. You've industrialized warfare beyond our comprehension." The psychological impact on German forces was devastating. Wehrmacht soldiers could hear American trucks all night, every night. Endless motors, endless supplies. They had 3 rounds per rifle while Americans were bringing millions of rounds. The sound itself became psychological warfare. The vehicles themselves amazed German engineers. The GMC CCKW 2.5-ton truck, the backbone of the Red Ball Express, represented mass production perfection. General Motors had produced over 500,000 of these vehicles by war's end, more trucks than the entire German military possessed of all types combined. The trucks featured innovations Germans hadn't implemented: all-wheel drive as standard, not exception. Automatic tyre inflation systems, waterproofing that allowed 30-inch fording, engines that ran on low-quality fuel without modification, heaters that actually worked in winter. More stunning was American maintenance philosophy. Where Germans rebuilt engines, Americans replaced them. Where Germans rationed parts, Americans discarded entire vehicles for minor problems. Where Germans had master mechanics, Americans had thousands of competent mechanics who could perform 80% of repairs. As the front moved east, the Red Ball Express adapted with speed that stunned German planning officers accustomed to weeks of preparation for major logistics changes. When the original route to Chartres became insufficient, Americans created Red Ball Express extensions overnight. White Ball Express, Rouen to Paris. Green Diamond, Cherbourg to railroad transfer points. Red Lion, Bayeux to Brussels. A BC, Antwerp, Brussels, Charleroi. Each new route was operational within 48 hours of conception. German staff officers required weeks to plan similar operations. The Americans simply painted new markers, assigned trucks, and started rolling. The predominance of African-American drivers in the Red Ball Express created cognitive dissonance for German racial theorists. Nazi ideology declared blacks inferior, incapable of technical tasks, lacking initiative. Yet these drivers were performing logistics miracles that German forces couldn't match. The African-American soldiers understood the irony. They knew what the Nazis thought of them, which made them drive even harder. Every mile they drove proved Hitler wrong. They were fighting racism with truck keys, defeating Nazi ideology through superior performance. Some German prisoners, forced to load Red Ball trucks as labourers, found their worldview shattered by working alongside African-American sergeants who calculated weight distributions faster than German engineers, who spoke better English than German English instructors, who treated prisoners fairly despite everything Nazi propaganda had told them about racial behaviour. The Red Ball Express required infrastructure Germans deemed impossible to create under combat conditions. Engineers built or reinforced 40 bridges, created 15 major fuel depots, established 26 maintenance stations, and constructed 8 temporary cities for drivers, all while the operation was running. The bridge at Mante had been destroyed by German engineers specifically to halt American logistics. The Wehrmacht calculated replacement would require 6 weeks minimum. American engineers built a temporary bridge in 14 hours, while Red Ball convoys detoured only 8 miles on hastily bulldozed bypass roads. German engineers observed American construction methods with amazement. No planning meetings, no detailed blueprints, just immediate action. They built faster than Germans could destroy, created infrastructure that appeared overnight in French fields. One Red Ball Express achievement particularly stunned German artillery officers: ammunition supply rates that exceeded their highest theoretical calculations. American artillery units fired without restriction, a luxury no German unit had enjoyed since 1942. During the reduction of Metz fortifications in September 1944, the XX Corps artillery fired 100,000 rounds in 24 hours. The Red Ball Express delivered every round, plus 20% surplus. German artillery defending Metz was rationed to 50 rounds per gun per day. The disparity was overwhelming. American guns fired continuously for hours, while German artillery officers calculated that such bombardments required 50 truckloads of ammunition per hour. The Red Ball provided it without pause. The Red Ball Express consumed vehicles at rates that would have paralysed any other military. By late September, mechanical attrition reached staggering proportions: average vehicle life, 10,000 miles, normal, 30,000. Daily deadline rate, 30% of all vehicles. Engines replaced, 500 weekly. Tyres consumed, 10,000 weekly. Total vehicles destroyed or abandoned, 5,000 plus. Yet the operation never slowed. American production had anticipated such losses. Ships arrived weekly at French ports carrying hundreds of new trucks. Replacement drivers were trained in 2 days and thrown into convoys. German calculations showed Americans destroying more trucks weekly than the Wehrmacht possessed in France. Yet their transport capacity increased rather than decreased. They had achieved something Germans thought impossible: logistics faster than consumption. French civilians along the Red Ball route witnessed American abundance that contradicted years of German occupation scarcity. The psychological impact on occupied populations was immediate and profound. The Red Ball Express drivers, particularly African Americans, often shared their rations with French civilians despite regulations. Every stop children would gather, and drivers would give them chocolate, cigarettes, soap. The contrast with German occupation was stark. Americans gave away casually what Germans had rationed strictly. German intelligence reported the propaganda impact. French civilians now believe American victory inevitable. They cite the truck convoys as proof. Resistance activity has increased 400% along Red Ball routes. The population that accepted our occupation now actively opposes it. In early September 1944, the Red Ball Express faced its greatest challenge. Patton's Third Army had advanced so far that even the Red Ball struggled to maintain supply rates. The round trip now exceeded 700 miles. Drivers were collapsing, vehicles were disintegrating. German intelligence detected the strain. General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel reported September 8th. American supply lines show signs of collapse. Convoy intervals have increased from 5 to 15 minutes. Vehicle speed has decreased. This is our opportunity. But American adaptability again surprised the Germans. Within 72 hours, the Red Ball Express reorganized. Created intermediate transfer points, cutting individual runs to 350 miles. Implemented driver rotation systems. Established forward maintenance bases. Doubled the number of assigned vehicles. By September 12th, tonnage delivery had actually increased. The crisis that should have halted Patton only made the system stronger. Supplementing the Red Ball Express, Americans implemented another logistics solution Germans deemed impossible: large-scale aerial supply. C-47 transport aircraft began delivering critical supplies directly to forward units, each aircraft carrying 3 tons. On September 16, 1944, Wehrmacht observers counted 900 transport flights in a single day, delivering 2,700 tons by air. The Luftwaffe, at its peak, had managed 300 tons daily to Stalingrad, and considered that a maximum effort. The Americans used transport aircraft like trucks, no fighter escort concerns, no fuel limitations. They assumed losses and overwhelmed them with numbers. The Wehrmacht couldn't compete with this industrial arithmetic. The Red Ball Express operated under command principles that violated German military hierarchy. Junior officers made decisions reserved for generals in the Wehrmacht. Sergeants commanded operations larger than German colonels managed. This decentralization baffled German observers. American logistics operated without apparent central control. Every lieutenant acted like a general, every sergeant like a colonel. Chaos should have resulted. Instead, they achieved efficiency the Wehrmacht couldn't match with rigid hierarchy. By October 1944, advancing railheads began to reduce Red Ball Express requirements. The operation that was supposed to last 10 days had continued for 82 days, delivering 412,000 tons of supplies over 122 million ton-miles. German commanders, now fighting on their own borders, reflected on what they had witnessed. Field Marshal Model wrote in his final report, "We were not defeated by American tanks or planes primarily. We were defeated by American trucks." The Red Ball Express proved that in modern war, logistics is strategy. The transition to rail transport was itself a marvel. American railroad engineers had reconstructed 1,000 miles of destroyed French rail lines while the Red Ball was running. They laid new track faster than Germans had destroyed it, often using captured German rail equipment. The final Red Ball Express statistics defied every German calculation of logistical possibility. 82 days of operation, 412,193 tons of supplies delivered. 122 million ton-miles. 5,958 vehicles average, peak 7,000. 23,000 total drivers employed, 700,000 gallons of fuel consumed daily, 40,000 tons of ammunition delivered to Patton alone, 15 million rations transported, 135,000 medical supply tons. Reviewing these figures in captivity, German officers admitted they had calculated American logistics based on European precedent. They had multiplied their best performance by 3 and assumed that was American maximum. They were wrong by a factor of 10. Beyond tonnage and distance, the Red Ball Express achieved something more profound. It destroyed German faith in their own military superiority. Wehrmacht officers who had dismissed Americans as soft and mechanically dependent watched those same Americans achieve logistics miracles through determination and industrial abundance. German prisoners of war would stand silent at prison camp fences, counting passing Red Ball trucks. Some wept. They understood what it meant, not just that Americans could supply their armies, but that they could waste more than Germans could produce. They were watching their worldview collapse, one truck at a time. The Red Ball Express forced an unexpected racial reckoning within the American military itself. The operation's success depended overwhelmingly on African American soldiers who were still segregated, denied equal treatment, and barred from combat roles. General Eisenhower, visiting Red Ball operations in September 1944, witnessed the contradiction firsthand. His aide, Captain Harry Butcher, recorded, "The general stood watching coloured drivers who'd been at it for 20 hours straight. He said, 'These men are winning the war as surely as any infantry. We need to reconsider many things.'" The success created pressure for integration that contributed to military desegregation 3 years later. African American soldiers had proved in France what they always knew. Given the tools and opportunity, they would match anyone. The Red Ball was their combat, and they won it decisively. German racial theorists struggled to explain the contradiction. SS racial science publications simply stopped mentioning American logistics operations. The evidence was too overwhelming to deny, too damaging to acknowledge. German military engineers studied Red Ball Express operations intensively after the war. The lessons revolutionized logistics thinking worldwide. Volume overcomes inefficiency. Mechanical redundancy eliminates vulnerability. Decentralized execution enables speed. Standardization multiplies capability. Human endurance has limits, but they're higher than assumed. General Franz Halder, former chief of the German General Staff, wrote in 1950, "The Red Ball Express proved logistics determines strategy, not vice versa. Americans understood this. We learned it too late." Among the 23,000 Red Ball drivers, individual stories of heroism emerged that Germans found incomprehensible within their military framework. These were verified accounts from military records. Corporal John L. Houston drove continuously for 48 hours, delivering ammunition to the 2nd Armoured Division at Cambrai, falling asleep at the wheel 3 times but continuing after being revived by other drivers. Private Booker T. Washington's truck caught fire from overheated brakes while carrying medical supplies. Instead of abandoning it as procedure required, he drove the burning vehicle 2 miles to a field hospital, jumping out as flames reached the cab. The supplies saved wounded soldiers from both armies. These stories, multiplied thousands of times, revealed American military culture to observing Germans: individual initiative, calculated risk-taking, and mission accomplishment over regulatory compliance. Desperately, German forces attempted to create their own version of the Red Ball Express in late 1944. Operation Greif during the Battle of the Bulge included plans for captured American trucks to create German supply lines. The effort failed immediately. German drivers couldn't maintain American speeds. German mechanics couldn't repair American equipment fast enough. German fuel supplies couldn't sustain the consumption rates. Most fundamentally, Germans couldn't replicate the American attitude of unlimited resources. Oberst Otto Skorzeny, commanding the operation, reported, "We captured 50 American trucks. Within a week, 30 were deadlined. Americans would have replaced them. We tried to repair them. That difference explains our defeat." The winter of 1944 to 45 provided the Red Ball Express's ultimate test. Freezing rain, snow and ice should have stopped wheeled transport. German doctrine stated wheeled logistics became impossible below -10 degrees Celsius. Yet the Red Ball Express continued. Drivers wrapped chains on tyres, poured alcohol in radiators, and kept rolling. Speeds dropped from 35 to 15 miles per hour, but tonnage delivery continued. German observers reported ice-covered convoys moving through blizzards that had stopped panzer divisions. The Americans had created a logistics system that functioned regardless of weather, terrain, or enemy action. It wasn't elegant or efficient by German standards, but it was unstoppable. In May 1945, captured German logistics officers were required to study Red Ball Express operations for historical records. Their conclusions were unanimous and devastating to German military pride. General der Infanterie Friedrich Schulz summarized, "The Red Ball Express represents warfare we never imagined. Americans created a temporary civilization, thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, millions of tons of supplies, that existed only to feed armies, then dissolved when no longer needed. We built permanent infrastructure over years. They created superior temporary systems in days." The most insightful analysis came from Generaloberst Heinz Guderian, father of German armoured warfare. "We invented blitzkrieg but never solved its fundamental limitation, logistics. Americans solved it through industrial excess we deemed impossible. The Red Ball Express was not a supply line, but a flowing river of material that drowned our forces." The Red Ball Express cost the United States approximately $100 million in 1944 dollars. Vehicles destroyed, fuel consumed, roads destroyed, French claims for damage. German staff officers, accustomed to managing scarcity, found the figure incomprehensible, yet Americans considered it cheap. The operation enabled the capture of 400,000 German soldiers, the liberation of France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and shortened the war by an estimated 6 months. Each day of war cost America $250 million. The Red Ball Express paid for itself in a single day of shortened conflict. Lieutenant General John C. H. Lee, commanding logistics for the European theatre, stated, "We wore out 5,000 trucks and 23,000 men to destroy the German army in France. In any previous war, that would be catastrophic losses. In American industrial war, it's acceptable overhead." An unexpected consequence of the Red Ball Express was the revolutionary impact on post-war civilian logistics. Thousands of drivers returned to America with experience operating the world's largest transportation network. These veterans founded trucking companies, designed interstate highways, and created the modern American logistics industry. Companies like Yellow Freight, Roadway, and Consolidated Freightways were started by Red Ball veterans who applied military logistics to civilian commerce. They had learned in France that volume beats efficiency, speed beats perfection, and if you can keep trucks rolling 24 hours, you can move the world. Military historians universally recognize the Red Ball Express as the decisive logistics operation of the European theatre. Without it, Patton's advance stops, Paris falls weeks later, and German forces successfully establish winter defensive lines. The operation validated American military doctrine that emphasized logistics over tactics. While German officers studied Clausewitz and battlefield maneuver, Americans studied Detroit assembly lines and railroad timetables. The Red Ball Express demonstrated that in modern warfare, the ability to supply forces determines victory more than tactical brilliance. On September 15, 1944, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, supreme German commander in the West, received comprehensive intelligence on the Red Ball Express. After studying the reports for hours, he summoned his staff. "Gentlemen," he announced, "we face something beyond military solution. The Americans have created a supply system that makes distance irrelevant. Our strategy assumed their culminating point, where advancing forces outrun supplies. That point doesn't exist. They have revolutionized warfare, and we are fighting the last war." His operations officer, Oberst Hans Speidel, suggested interdicting the Red Ball routes with the remaining Luftwaffe. Von Rundstedt's response revealed complete understanding. "With what shall we interdict? They have 6,000 trucks. If we destroy 1,000, which we cannot, They'll replace them in a week. We'd need to destroy 200 trucks daily just to match their production. We don't have 200 aircraft total. Behind the statistics were human stories that revealed American character to German observers. Drivers who hadn't slept for 3 days refusing relief because their trucks might not make it through. Mechanics working in freezing rain to keep convoys rolling. Teenagers lying about their age to drive trucks. Such stories, multiplied throughout the operation, created a mythology that demoralized German forces. The Americans were not soft as propaganda claimed. They drove themselves harder than Germans drove horses, but they did it voluntarily, not from fear. This made them more dangerous than German doctrine had understood. The Red Ball Express became unintentional propaganda more powerful than any planned operation. German soldiers could hear the convoys at night, endless streams of motors that never stopped. The sound itself became psychological warfare. German units reported hearing ghost convoys that demoralized troops as effectively as actual logistics. The knowledge that Americans had unlimited supplies while Germans rationed their last ammunition created despair that undermined combat effectiveness. American psychological warfare units recognized the impact. They began broadcasting truck engine sounds toward German lines when actual convoys weren't present. German units reported these phantom convoys as real, demonstrating the psychological damage the Red Ball Express had inflicted. In November 1944, with rail lines partially restored, the Red Ball Express was officially discontinued. But its methods had revolutionized military logistics permanently. The concept of continuous, high-volume, wasteful but effective supply became American military doctrine. The final innovation was the speed of dissolution. The massive operation, 23,000 men, 6,000 vehicles, hundreds of installations, disappeared in 72 hours. Troops reassigned, vehicles redistributed, routes returned to civilian use. Germans required months to create smaller operations and years to dissolve them. Americans built what they needed, used it, discarded it, and built something better. When German generals surrendered in May 1945, many cited the Red Ball Express specifically as demonstrating the hopelessness of continued resistance. General der Panzertruppe Hasse von Manteuffel stated at his interrogation, "When we understood your logistics capacity, we knew the war was lost. You could supply armies faster than we could destroy them. The Red Ball Express was a weapon against which we had no defense." Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, among Germany's most competent commanders, was asked what most surprised him about American forces. His answer, "Not your tanks, not your planes, but your trucks." The Red Ball Express showed us that you had militarized your entire society's production capacity. We were fighting your factories, not just your soldiers. The final statistics of the Red Ball Express stand as testament to American industrial warfare. Total cargo delivered, 412,193 tons. Total distance covered, 122 million ton-miles. Trucks employed, 5,958 daily average, 7,000 peak. Drivers involved, 23,000 total. Operating days, 82. Fuel consumed, 57 million gallons. Tires worn out, 180,000. Vehicles destroyed, 5,000 plus. Cost, $100 million. German divisions defeated through supply advantage, 47. Estimated war days shortened, 180. These numbers tell a story that transcended military operations. They represent the moment when warfare changed forever, when industrial capacity became more important than tactical brilliance, when logistics determined strategy rather than serving it. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, the United States Postal Service issued a commemorative stamp honoring the Red Ball Express at the National Postal Museum in Washington, D.C. The ceremony recognized the operation that had been overshadowed by combat operations, but proved equally decisive in Allied victory. Veterans who attended spoke of their pride in an operation that proved American industrial might and individual determination could overcome any obstacle. They had driven through exhaustion, through mechanical failure, through weather that stopped armor. They were black soldiers mostly, segregated, discriminated against, denied recognition during the war. But they had delivered victory at 35 miles per hour. The Red Ball Express proved that in modern warfare, logistics is not support, it is the main effort. The operation demonstrated that industrial democracy could mobilize resources on a scale that totalitarian efficiency couldn't match. German generals who had laughed at American logistics were silenced by 6,000 trucks delivering 12,500 tons daily across 700 miles of liberated France. They had assumed Americans would follow European precedent, conserve resources, advance cautiously. Instead, Americans created a logistics tsunami that drowned German forces in Allied abundance. The operation's success came not from military genius, but from American characteristics Germans never understood: industrial excess, mechanical aptitude, improvisational skill, and most importantly, the initiative of individual soldiers who made independent decisions that in the Wehrmacht would require field marshal approval. In his memoirs, General George S. Patton, whose Third Army was the primary beneficiary of the Red Ball Express, wrote the ultimate tribute. The truck drivers of the Red Ball Express deserved as much credit for the defeat of Germany as any combat unit. They drove through exhaustion, through mechanical failure, through weather that stopped armor. Without them, the Third Army doesn't move. Without movement, we don't win. They were black soldiers mostly, segregated, discriminated against, denied recognition. But they won the war as surely as any rifleman. History must record this truth. That truth stands as the final testament to the Red Ball Express. 23,000 mostly African-American drivers, operating 6,000 trucks on a one-way highway to victory, achieved what German military science declared impossible. They supplied advancing armies faster than physics should allow, maintained tempo beyond human endurance, and proved that in modern warfare, the side with the most trucks beats the side with the best tactics. The German generals had laughed at American logistics, dismissing it as wasteful, undisciplined, impossible to sustain. 82 days later, those same generals surrendered to armies supplied by the Red Ball Express, finally understanding that American trucks had defeated German tanks, that industrial abundance had overwhelmed military excellence, that logistics had become strategy. The Red Ball Express ended on November 16, 1944, but its impact echoed through military history. It proved that in the industrial age, victory belongs not to the bravest soldiers or brightest generals, but to the nation that can deliver the most supplies, the fastest, the farthest. The German generals who laughed at American logistics in August 1944 signed surrender documents in May 1945, defeated by 23,000 truck drivers who revolutionized warfare at 35 miles per hour. Their story deserves its place among the great military operations of history, not because it was elegant or efficient, it was neither, but because it worked. The Red Ball Express kept Patton rolling, kept the Germans retreating, and proved that in modern war, the convoy of trucks matters more than the column of tanks. The highways of France still bear the scars of the Red Ball Express. Ruts worn by overloaded trucks, bridges hastily repaired, roadsides littered with abandoned vehicles. But the greatest monument to the operation is the speed of Allied victory. Every day the war shortened, saved thousands of lives. The Red Ball Express shortened it by months. In the end, the German generals who laughed at American logistics learned the hardest lesson of modern warfare. Amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics, and Americans talk trucks. The Red Ball Express was America talking very loudly indeed, in the roar of 6,000 engines that never stopped, carrying democracy and destruction at 35 miles per hour down a one-way road to victory. The last word belongs to a German officer whose name is lost to history, quoted by a Red Ball driver at the 1994 commemoration. Standing beside a road in Belgium, watching the endless convoy of American trucks, the officer said in accented English to his captors, "We prepared for everything. Your tanks, your planes, your ships. We never prepared for your trucks. How do you defeat an enemy who has more trucks than you have soldiers?" The answer rolled past him at 5-minute intervals, driven by exhausted Americans who were rewriting the rules of warfare one delivery at a time. The Red Ball Express had made logistics into strategy, supply into victory, and trucks into the most decisive weapon of the European war. The German generals stopped laughing when they understood this truth, but by then Patton was already at their gates, supplied by the greatest logistics operation in military history.